Hello team, it's time for the Daily Detangler. And today I want to talk a little bit more about the middle. On a previous Detangler, I talked about this challenge that Catalyst laid out with a overview of one of our clients, OmniTrax, and the approach we were taking. On the left side, he had asked, how clear do you think this overview is of this approach? And our team rated it very, very clear. And then he asked, well, how well did we execute on this plan? It was clear, but how well did we execute? And answers were all over the place. And one of the things that was telling in that review that he had with the answers that he shared with me was that he thought we executed as a team, as a collective team, as a one. And I responded back with a daily detangler around this idea of what does it mean to execute? What does it mean to execute? So how well do you think the team executed on this plan at OmniTrax? Well, what is execution? What does it mean to execute? What is my role in execution? And today on this detangler, I wanted to talk about that further because I shared on that detangler about this idea that it's like a vice, that contributing and participating in this creative space to drive change feels like a vice, and it feels on one hand constricting and there's a lot of pressure, but on the other hand there's a lot of creativity, and there's actually freedom. It's a bit of a paradox. So I want to share a little bit on that, and then aligning to what, and what are the components or major tangles that can get in the way of thriving in the middle. So what does it mean to influence others, or get people on board, or bring people along, or get people on the same page, or connect them to an outcome? As you read through these on the left, we've heard these in our client calls, especially with account team members and account leads as they sell. And if you remember, Alexis has 40 people that she's trying to align. Our team has 5 or 6 that Catalyst is trying to align. And I've heard him say some of these things as well. How do we get people to show up? Well, how do we connect to the outcome? How do we align the people behind the conversation? And it's a lot of complexity. Dmitry Mendeleev is the person who created the periodic table, and he said, "Hey, I saw a dream. I had a dream in a table where all the elements, the periodic elements, fell into place. I immediately wrote it down on a piece of paper." Don't you wish execution and contributing were that easy? I bet Catalyst would appreciate it being that easy, where all the elements and the components would just fall into place. But in the previous detangler, I talked about this idea of the vice, and I shared that expectations and aligning to the expectations of the customer versus my own expectations, aligning perspectives around the customer, which is Catalyst, versus my perspective, the principles that the customer believes will work versus my personal principles, and the mindset shifts required to align my mindset to the customer. And when it comes to things like this, especially in the area of like principles, it's easy to think about values or beliefs, but these are group dynamics that can create a unified view that can answer some of those questions of how do we get aligned. For example, like I think about what if we all had the same perspective? What if we all had the same principles with regard to our work, etc.? And where those things don't happen, it takes a lot of energy. For example, if we're not aligned, we can have what we perceive to be contradicting input, or we could have irreconcilable differences. We can waste time, or we can have conflict. And when you look at conflict, that conflict can actually become a barrier to success if we're not careful, as opposed to the productive conflict or creating creative conflict, right? And you'll hear in some of these recordings with account team leaders where they spend a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy to align. And align what? Is it align people's priorities, or is it aligning their expectations, their mindset, their principles, and their perspectives? So one of the things that Catalyst has shared is this idea of how much time he has to spend navigating our team versus the client. And you hear this as well in the calls with the GADs, where they spend, and they're almost afraid to and they are afraid to share how long it takes and how much time it takes and how much effort it takes to navigate their own company versus navigate the customer. And I don't know what the exact number is, but the idea that Catalyst spends maybe what 60, 70, 80% of his time helping the team align versus talking to the customer, or maybe it's higher. We'd have to ask him, but how do we get that number lower? What if we are all just focused on the customer and helping him navigate the customer instead of the time that he's putting in? The same thing is happening with IQVIA. Alexis is having to spend a lot of time navigating. So to me, one of the things that I've wrestled with is, I consider myself pretty smart, and not the smartest guy in the room by any means, but I have some skills and I'm smart and I have some expertise. So I wrapped myself for a long time around this axle of how do I get plugged in? 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 And that creates a double-edged sword, right? Like it's really hard to get to a clear answer of how do you get plugged in. And then it's also who am I asking that to? In this case, I'm usually asking Catalyst, and that puts a lot of pressure on him to figure out how to make sure, how to make sure we're aligned. And that's a lot of effort up for him. And when I show up that way, I can't, if I think about it, I tend to show up like, well, what's in it for me? What do I want to do? What do I need to do? What do I need to get done? What am I going to learn? What am I going to contribute? What is my expertise? What does Scott need from me? What are my priorities today? What are the things that I'm working on? Right? I can sound like that. And if you listen to that, that's pretty selfish, right? And it's all about me. So when you look at it, it seems on the surface that I'm trying to be helpful, like, let me be helpful. What do you need from me? That puts a lot of burden on him. I mean, the questions it has good intent. I have good intent with the question, but how do you get to an answer on that? What do you want me to do, etc. And this really became a barrier for me where this vice of trying to navigate the outside in and the inside out and top to bottom and bottom to top, like I talked about in the previous detangler, and align my perspectives to Scott and align my perspectives to Catalyst, and mindset to the team and Catalyst, and perspectives, expectations, right? And it really got me to thinking about, what some basic things like, what do I maybe it's not so much about what activities I take, but maybe it's around my my perspectives and my expectations and my principles and how I'm thinking. So it led me to think about, you know, what is what does it mean to focus on the customer? Is my thinking about the focus on our customer, is my understanding of the customer the same as Catalyst? Um, what does it mean to contribute? Is my definition of and how I think about contribution the same as Catalyst? Being creative, is it the same way? Do I view creativity and being creative as the same as Catalyst and customer? Because he is the customer. What about team? Am I thinking about teaming and how to team? Am I thinking about that the same way? What about understanding the environment and what that means? Do I have the same understanding of why our environment and our culture is set up the way it is? And do I think the same way as Catalyst does? What about progress and how I define progress? Do I have the same views about what progress is as Catalyst does? And then, leveraging my skills. Do I have the same perspective and the same expectations and the same view of leveraging my skills? And when I looked at that, the more I realized that these things were very different for me, and that the question for me really became, how do I actually unplug? How do I unplug from what I think is normal and right? And if you look at all these people, they're doing the same things that they've done in the past, and their definition of creativity is around maybe wearing a different color tie, or maybe wearing a suit instead of just a shirt. Their definition of progress means using charts and graphs. Their definition of teaming means having a conversation, not necessarily producing anything together. Their definition of skills is navigating a software package, and that's not what Catalyst is talking about when he's talking about skills. So all of these attributes or these components become barriers to my ability to plug in, and I have to learn how to unplug. And that's the nature of driving change, isn't it? Is sometimes you have to let go of some things and then retool yourself. So that's been today's Daily Detangler. I'd love to hear feedback on that. And what are you having to let go? And what do you think of these perspectives and expectations as we drive change? Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.